in the Constitution of Kenya and also the BBI. It is a concern that our long-term value-based nation building and developmental future is threatened by systemic failures and philosophical poverty. That's the end of my presentation. Over to you, Christine.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie, for the good presentation. So now I invite Mr. Kamodo Waiganjo to give his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine and Valerie. Thank you, Valerie, for that presentation. Because I'm a discussant, I do not want to rehash the things that have been very eloquently presented, both by Professor Kangu, my good classmate, and Valerie, who we worked together for a long time at the CIC. So what I'll do is make some general comments in terms of context setting, in terms of how I think the issues that I think as a civil society community we need to take into consideration as we engage in this BBI process. The first thing is to look back as to when this process started. This process, unlike the 2010 Constitution, which was a people-driven process, was very much a politician-driven process. And we must not delegitimize politicians because they have a stake in societal affairs and constitutional affairs like everybody else. But I think we must understand that what drives them and what drives the interest of the citizens are not always the same thing. And so when this process started, some of us felt very strongly that civil society, recognizing that politicians are going to seek to accomplish their gains one way or the other, and they have the wherewithal, they have the resources, they have the public space to push their issues, we needed as a civil society community to be very clear on what are irreducible minimums. For us in the devolution community, we needed to define very, very clearly what are the things, whatever else the politicians bring, if the following things are not there, we will not support this initiative. My concern is that I am not sure that has been very well framed. Even today, I am not sure that I understand very clearly as a civil society coalition, what are the things we are not willing to negotiate and what are the things that we must include in any proposal for reform. And I think that's one missing link, so that what we do is sometimes we concentrate on the minors and ignore the majors. So that's number one. Number two is to recognize that a constitutional process also requires a significant dose of pragmatism. I like what Professor Mutaha said, that sometimes you have to decide what are the things that are important to you, in which are so important and so critical that you may be willing to ignore some of the things that you may not necessarily, be very excited about, as long as you're achieving your key objectives. And again, I'm not sure that we have defined that very, very clearly. The third thing to say is that listening to Professor Mutaha in the morning, earlier on this morning, I got the feeling that if you actually were to separate the devolution gains from other issues, you recognize that most of the provisions that have been made in this document are actually supportive of a stronger devolution structure. Now, obviously, they haven't gone as far as they could, and I think there are ways in which they could be improved, and there are one or two things that may be problematic. But on the whole, a lot of those provisions are actually supportive of a stronger devolved government system. The question we then need to ask is, are these gains so important that while there may be challenges in other components of the document, that they're important enough for us to say, well, this is a negotiated document, we can't get everything, but we've gotten the important issues. Are we able to say that? Now, let me go to what those are. The enhancement of the revenue allocation to counties to 35% is a huge thing. I don't even think that Kenyans have internalized what that means. Now, I know people then go on to ask, but where will the money come from? Even now, we don't have enough, or government has not been paying the money. Why do they need the constitutional amendment to do what they could do without the need for a constitutional change? The truth of the matter is that sometimes government are forced to do what they do by constitutions. The reason why we put a 15% is because we knew without that 15% floor, governments will not release the money as we want. And you have seen the fight about resources. In the last years between 2017 and 2021, the allocation of money to the counties against revenue have actually been going down. So the enhancement of the amount that is going to be released to counties to 35%, in a sense, is a major game changer for me about these amendments. And then let the figure be there, and then we can deal with where will the money come from. One of the advantages of this change that I think, again, we need to internalize is that the more resources we send to the regions, the reality is that the more the pressure to be at the top reduces. Because the reason why people want to be in power is not just so that they can have power, it's so that they can control resources. As my friend Dr. Ibrahim used to say about procurement, the more you reduce monies to the center and to the regions, I mean from the center to the regions, the clamor for the top is reduced, and the need to have a very bloated top is reduced. So for me, let us keep pushing for money to the regions, and then let us deal with the questions about how do we protect those resources from gummy hands that may want to, now that there's more money, to waste and to steal. That is the question we need to be asking. Let us have more money because it reduces, inevitably, it reduces the pressure on top. And from where I see it, it actually does have a greater capacity for reducing the amount of pilferage, at the bottom. And the reason is, and those of you who've interacted with counties know, that the more citizens become empowered, and that is not a difficult thing, the more difficult it is even for those at the county governments to disappear with a lot of public funds. If you tell people you're doing a project called a market, and you don't do it, people know, and there'll be demonstrations as we empower the people. So for me, the big game changer, and for which I'll probably be willing to ignore a lot of the other problems with the BBI, is that we are getting more money to the regions. Now, the issue that Professor Mutaha raised about the criteria, what I like about that criteria is that criteria is not just about corruption in the counties. In fact, properly applied, it should actually relate also to corruption at the national government, because all it says is that when you're dividing revenue under Article 202, which is about the division between county governments and the national government, and when you're dividing between counties, you will consider the question of the need to eradicate corruption. Now, taken literally, then what you should be asking is, where do we lose most of our money to corruption? If most of our money to corruption is lost at the national level, then it means that is where we need to be reducing money. I saw a figure last week that talked about 224 billion shillings that were lost in 1 year. Now, in that year, the amount of money released to the counties was about 250 billion shillings. That tells you that the money that is lost in corruption is insignificant at the county level when you compare to what you lose on the national level. You can even look at the various governors who have been being prosecuted. Honorable Ojamong is being prosecuted for a contract of 10 million shillings. Equivalence that with a typical permanent secretary. Their charge runs into the billions. So what I'm saying is that while it is wrong to have corruption at any level, it is easier to manage and eradicate corruption at the bottom. And so let us have more resources at that level. The other issue that, and I think we haven't talked about, is that one of the things that the BBI does is the BBI constitutional amendment does, is that it also equalizes the respective powers of the national government and the county governments. If you look at the provisions around Article 218 and thereafter about the right of the national government to access money before DORA, a matter that we took to the Supreme Court. If you look at the right of county governments to budget, even before DORA is passed, government and national government at the same level. And that gives the right and the ability, it incentivizes the national government to reach a settlement on resources early enough. That incentive has not been there. The issue of the World Development Fund, and I hear what a professor was saying, and I saw in Valerie's paper, you also discuss it. I think we need to look at this positively. The reality is that while we have had exclusion at the national level leading to devolution, where certain regions were excluded, when you go to the counties, there is also exclusion. Many governors who see that certain areas are not vote baskets for them, sometimes do not utilize any resources in those regions, because those regions have no benefit, political benefit. So what this concept does is to ensure that whether or not a particular area is politically beneficial to a governor, whoever, to those in politics, that area is still entitled to resources through the WDF. I think the issue we need to be careful, and I agree with Prof, is that we need to ensure that this does not convert into a CDF, because this is not so much a ward development fund for the MCAs. It is a requirement that when the county executive is spending money, it will spend at least 5% in each ward. That really is, and that is where even in the legislation that's going to come onto that issue, we need to ensure that we are not talking about this big money being allocated to MCAs, but money that is being spent through the normal budget process, but there's a requirement of a certain minimum amount to the county government, to the wards. I think the final point I want to make is that the provisions with regard to devolution, particularly on the CRA and the role of the CIA, are something that we need to look at. Somebody asked during the break about the question of the fight for resources and the formula. Now, I think we need to, for those participating in this discussion, we need to make a distinction between two things. One is the division of money between the national government and the county governments. That is what the amendments to Article 203, 202 is making. Then the question of now the money that has been allocated to the counties, how is it divided between them? That is an issue of formula. And that is an issue of what CRA and the Senate discusses. The question we need to be asking is, now that we have defined the amount to not less than 35%, which obviously means I doubt that we'll ever go above 35%. And so the role of CRA in that discussion will probably be significantly reduced. And then you go to the question of the division between counties and the formula. There's an article that I can't remember the exact number that talks about their money should not be should not be more than 3 times per capita allocation per person. That in a sense now sets a new formula that within which the CRA must operate within. Have we then weakened the powers of the CRA? And is this a good thing? Is the 35%, which means that almost the allocation to county government is now defined without the necessity of having to go through the sort of arguments we've gone through, and the fact that we have set a ceiling around which the formula can operate. The formula cannot operate around a per capita allocation per individual to 3 times. Has that effectively neutered the role of the CRA? And what are the implications? Is that a good thing? And these are fundamental issues that I think we need to discuss about. What does the formula for allocation of money, division of money between counties address? Does it address the allocation per person, or does it allocate all these other parameters, including the question of poverty index, include the question of area and geography and all those issues? I think that's part of the conversation that for me has not happened effectively. I think there are a couple of other issues that one would discuss, but I think this forum would probably be better served now, since the substance has been well articulated in Prof's presentation and Valerie's, in a discussion arising from plenary. I think that, our own group plenary, so that we can then respond to issues that members have a concern about, as opposed to regurgitating issues that I think members have interacted with. Thank you. Let me make a final point. I am actually concerned, and I need to say this because it's a civil society forum, that the instinctive reaction by civil society, including many of us in the devolution space, has been BBI. I'm not sure, and I think we need some time to ask whether that instinctive reaction is informed by content, or is informed by our disappointment, our legitimate disappointment in the failure of government to even implement what is there. So it's almost like we don't trust government at all. But isn't it better then to have the constitutional provisions anchored there, even for a future government that we may trust a little more, but its abilities are restricted and its responsibilities are constitutionally defined. Isn't that a more prudent, route to go? But I leave that to us to discuss in our own plenary. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie and Kamodo, for the good presentations. Those are really great insights, especially the fact that as CSO, we need to be clear on what are our irreducible minimums. So now we'll move, because of time, we'll move to the plenary sessions, and I would encourage people to ask their questions. You can type them in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand so that you can ask your questions directly. So just to read some of the comments. There's someone, Paul Odongo, who is saying, my great worry is that what is BBI going to address that the Constitution of Kenya has failed? If the Constitution is not fully implemented up to now, how is the PFM Act going to be enforced so that governors are held accountable on misappropriation of county funds? Because most of the time they have arrested and set free on, they're arrested and set free on bonds while counties suffer on service delivery. And then someone is applauding Valerie for the good presentation. And then someone is thanking Kamodo for the clarification on the word development fund that is not a kitty for MCAs. And then Eunice is saying, if we devolve more structures to the counties, do you think that 5% will be justifiable? Of course, the senators to keep their eyes open on governance so that there will be no corruption at county levels. And then Pauline Wahinya is saying, Mr. Kamodo, your view on commission CIC implications of the constitution, where did you leave it? Oh, sorry, the question is not clear. I think they're asking why you left, where CIC left the issue of implementation of the constitution. And then George Okenyi is saying the highlights were really great. And then George Amos Pakiat is saying, is there no other way we can solve the devolution issues without BBI? So those are the questions for now. So maybe our presenters can address them.
Valerie, you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Sorry, you can go on, Wakili.
Okay, let me just, let me pick the easy ones. Then I'll leave Valerie to deal with the difficult ones. And let me start with Amos's question, Amos Kiach, on whether we could have resolved this without BBI. Yes, we could. The truth of the matter is that a lot of the proposals that have been made in the BBI, in a situation where there was goodwill and a pro-devolved policy, a pro-devolution policy, they actually would have been sorted out without BBI. If you look at the increase of money to the counties, you do not need any law, because what the current Article 223 do is to put a minimum of 15%. You can even take it to 50%. But you and I know that sometimes governments are forced by law to do what is right. In fact, in almost every provision of the Constitution, it's possible to argue that you actually don't even need provisions on human rights protections, because governments can protect human rights without being required by the Constitution. But sometimes you have the Constitution because we recognize that government always don't do what is pro people. So for me, yes, we could have, but BBI is helpful, at least on the devolution space. And I'm restricting myself to the devolution space. The things that are there are helpful. Some of these issues, particularly on the respective powers of the National Assembly, the national government and counties, we've litigated over them for the last 5 years, 10 years. Prof will know, Genavaler will know, Tisa will know, Christine, you know. We've been to the Supreme Court, to the Court of Appeal, to the High Court, agitating on these issues. So for me, I'm glad that some of them have been, we will not have to go back to court. Now it's a question of, is there going to be compliance, and what is the cost of non-compliance? The Ruth Mudhoni, how will accountability of what development fund curb devolved corruption? Now, I am one of those who's very hesitant to talk about narratives like devolved corruption, because The problem with that narrative is it tends to assume that we devolved corruption, it went to the, just like we devolved functions. When we devolve functions, we devolve agriculture. It means agriculture has left the national level, and it has now come to the counties. The problem with the narrative of devolved corruption is that it almost sends the message that we moved, corruption from the top and took it to the counties, which is incorrect. The truth of the matter is that corruption is a national malaise. The question we should be asking, and I think this is a responsibility even of civil society, what structures do we put in the counties to ensure accountability? One of the sad things about devolution is that while resources and functions were devolved, accountability institutions stayed in the center. There are very few strong institutional, civil society institutional mechanisms in most counties, other than those near Nairobi. And so there's also a problem there in terms of whether we've also been working to strengthen the citizen to hold government accountable. Because ultimately, corruption is not just about EACC. It is about accountability at that level. When I do civic education in the regions, I say, the reason we devolve is because the governor stays with you. The MCA stay with you. It is very easy for you as citizens to talk to the governor as he's driving from work every morning to his office, and the MCAs live in your locality. The CECs live in your locality. The mechanisms for ensuring accountability are stronger, are more possible in the county level than it is at the national level. And so, while yes, we must continue to increase revenue to the counties, we must ensure the improvement of accountability mechanism. The final point is on Paul Odongo. Yes, the reality is that if we had implemented our constitution fully, even on the question of exclusion, a lot of these issues would not have been possible. However, there are certain political questions that could not have been resolved with the current constitution. The question of the expansion of the executive, which I agree with Prof, has some challenges, though my view is that the challenge is a different one, is the fact that we have created what are just super CSs, who can be fired at any moment. So I'm not sure that is a seriously expanded executive. I think if you wanted an expanded executive, then you needed to strengthen those offices so that they cannot just be fired at the whim of the president. I think it doesn't make sense to me why the president can just fire the prime minister without cause, without even going to parliament. So that is not a very senior expanded executive from where I sit. The leader of the opposition could have been enhanced by ensuring that he comes into that office with a coalition, because that also strengthened the political might of that office. But a lot of other things could actually have been done by a fuller implementation of the constitution. And I think the thing that we need to hold government accountable to going forward is now that they are the ones who have brought these provisions, particularly the ones on devolution. I like the other ones, which many of them were suspicious about. These are their proposals. These they must leave to implement. And whatever alliances we can get into, I used to say when we left CIC, and somebody has asked where we left it at CIC, we should have formed a coalition for civil societies to oversee implementation of the constitution. So that there is almost a civil society body that took over the work of the CIC. Unfortunately, that did not happen. The coalition for constitutional change was there, but the coalition for constitutional implementation has been missing. And I think that is something, there's a missing lacuna there. There's a lacuna there that I think can be filled by civil society. Valerie.
Thank you, KW.
My concern is every time we talk about youth, we can have a very well organized write-up about how we are going to do with our youth. But my biggest concern has been the implementation of whatever we plan as the government, as leaders for the youth. I'll give a small example on procurement. There's that those projects set for youth. Do you really benefit from this? In most cases, what happens is that as mature men and women, because maybe we are well up and we have some little resources here and there, and we are able to make to ensure that our companies are up to date in terms of the requirements. So I will just sit down and make my own company as a youth. And then I will benefit from whatever our youth were supposed to benefit. The youth will also feel like we do not have resources. So in case I am able to get like a contract to do 1, 2, 3 things, I'll look for someone who is not a youth to do it for me and just give me a small token, which will not even take me to the next step as a youth. So as we discuss about youth in the BBI or our youth in general, I think we don't get it right in most cases. That's my concern. I don't know whether it requires a reaction or not, but I think it's important we have it in our minds.
Hi, Barari. I want, mine is Pauline. I am asking, I said, Barari, you created, or whoever is moderating, I asked Mr. Kamodo about the CIC, Constitution Implementation Commission, when they left, because Cargo is talking about implementation of the Constitution. And they were the people who were mandated to make sure the Constitution issues were implemented before they leave the commission. That's what I'm asking. Because Mr. Cargo, when you are giving your presentation, you talked of the issues of policy, the issues of administration, and the commission left. What was it audited after the commission left? Because the issues are coming about no implementation, the Constitution has not been implemented. So my question is, where did you leave these? What happened? Was there audited, was there an audited account to show where you left this as a commission? Because Kenyans, we feel we paid for the commission as taxpayers' money. The commission was there. What happened? We cannot keep on saying it has not been implemented. That is my concern, because the commission was there. Thank you.
Okay, Pauline, let me answer that. Yeah, let me answer that quickly, and then I can leave the others. And I think even Prof. Mutaha, you can, jump in if there's some issues that I think you can respond to. Let me say this: the commission had a specific timeline and a specific responsibility in the 5 years that it was there. One of its primary responsibilities was to ensure that the laws necessary to implement the Constitution had been, enacted. And I would say that by the time we left, I would say maybe 90% of those laws had been passed. A couple had not been passed, they have since been passed. But there was 2 other areas that I think I believe the commission had a responsibility, which was about ensuring that the policies and what are called administrative procedures were a constitution. A lot of that we were not able to do by the time we left. Unfortunately, Parliament, in its wisdom, decided that the commission's term had come to an end and it could not be renewed. And that is the responsibility we had given Parliament. So we left that to people to then decide what to do. Our view, even at that time, was that this was a very young constitution. It required ownership at that level, someone to drive the constitutional implementation agenda, someone to keep reminding the country that we have a new constitution. But what we did was not only had now died. And so that's been a problem. And Pauline, we have a very comprehensive report that we wrote at the time at which we left the commission, indicating what we've been able to achieve, indicating the areas we have not been able to accomplish what was needed, and suggesting, making proposals in terms of changes, including the one Prof raised about reducing the size of the assembly, to make it not even so much about the budget, but to make it a more effective house. So there are many things that were done and the reports are there. And we left that to those who come after us, both in Parliament, we still have the CIOC and civil society to also own the process of implementation in the absence of the commission. So yes, we probably could have done better, but don't forget that we ourselves were limited to 5 years by the Constitution unless Parliament extended that time. Thank you.
Now, maybe I may need to add there that something very unique about the making of the Kenyan Constitution was the manner in which the citizens kept maneuvering their way around the politicians, sometimes conceding certain compromises along the line, other times having to accept even what was not very good. And it is in bearing in mind those challenges that we insisted on a Constitution Implementation Commission. But as I have said, it was a process of compromises. And so people would not want to have an implementation commission that is permanent. So they had to put a period. And the reason this commission was not extended is because it performed well to a point where the politicians became very, very uncomfortable with them. Because the Constitution had said that a parliament could extend the life of the commission. But if this commission had not performed very well and stood up to the politicians, they would easily have extended their term. But because they were standing up to them, they didn't want people to prefect them. So that is one of the problems we are facing, and we have to find other ways to deal with this. Perhaps what we should be saying is that since the BBI also has some provision on transition and consequential legislation, maybe we could advocate for a reinstitution of a body such as the CIC, and this time round give it a little longer time so that it can ensure that all these things are implemented. But while I'm on that particular point, I want to mention some other point which might escape us even as we focus on devolution, is that a fundamental question, a fundamental problem that faces Kenya today is the problem of unemployment, lack of jobs for the Kenyans, not just the youth alone, but even the mature Kenyans. And the BBI report somehow has mentioned that. But I have this view that the proposals they are making on addressing that are not very emphatic enough, because they don't seem to have asked the question, the question why we don't have jobs. And in my view, I have argued before in various forums that the reason is because we have killed the production industry in Kenya and turned the country into a supermarket for foreign manufactured goods. And so by our consumption, we buy goods manufactured by other people and therefore create jobs for them, but don't create jobs for our people. And I've looked at the BBI, and it is not very emphatic on how the government is going to protect and facilitate local production of goods, so that we are able to ask ourselves, why is it that goods produced in Uganda, in Kenya, even farm products, are cheaper than those things produced in Kenya, and therefore our markets are flooded by goods coming from those places and many other countries? What are we going to do? Because if we don't address the question of expanding our production industry and focus alone on just being marketers of what other people have produced, we will not generate adequate jobs for our people. And that is a major problem, even as we talk about devolution, because devolution is about enabling the people, or governance is about enabling the people to put food on the table, to survive, to have economic income, and sort out their problems. And they can't do that without employment. We need to relook at that report seriously on that issue of unemployment and how we can address it.
Thank you. Yeah, listening to what Prof and Wakili Kamoto have said, and just tying it to Amos' question of whether BBI is necessary and so many other questions that actually coming from Kenyans, even if you were to listen to discussions that happen, Kenyans are seemingly standing on the other side and just blaming the government and the politicians, and also just taking sides and really not getting to the real issues that affect Mwananchi and trying to see how they organize themselves around achieving their interest. But standing by and watching politicians turn this noble opportunity into a political discussion that is exclusive of citizens' interests, like Mutaha rightly puts across. I mean, there are issues of unemployment in Kenya. There are issues of poverty in Kenya. We are not hearing that discussion coming up. Kenyans are not even taking up the position in whatever way to even push their own preferred political candidates to voice their concern about the real issues that affect Kenyans. And I think that is the problem that we have had. I'm looking back in our governance reform process and just thinking about the Ufungamano initiative and how civil society came up with the unity of purpose that was demonstrated then. Can these discussions that are coming up by CSOs be able to marshal that unity and be the voice for Mwananchi to be able to voice their real concerns and use this opportunity where the two principles and within the context of this country, we know what the coming together of the two principles represents in the country, because they a perfect representation of our political divide. And yes, from that angle, I can say the BBI initiative was a good opportune moment to allow us as a country to take a break and really think about what ails us as a nation, as opposed to pursuing partisan political interest. And if we were to genuinely approach this space and the discussions that are going on for the common good of the country, I think we'll be able to move ahead and be able to resolve the many ills that have continued to affect this country and specifically affect the livelihood and welfare of Kenyans.
Valerie, before you go, there's a question that was directed to you, where someone, George Okinyi, was asking, kindly, there is a total confusion in the process of this initiative. At what stage were inputs to the document being given after launching at Bomas, the first meeting at Bomas?
I think this question was well answered by Prof in the morning when he spoke to the process of the BBI. But just to say that the BBI had two phases to it. There was the initial phase that when involved the task force going around and collecting comments and proposals from the public, and they came up with the first draft proposals that were launched in Bomas. And then that was again superseded by the committee of experts that came on board, and they too went around collecting public views. Now, because this was a political process and actually acknowledging the fact that we have politics that have played into this process, we ended up with a process that because of political emotions, some politicians felt like they had not been included. And therefore, by the time the second phase was concluding and the launch of the report was being done, the strong voices from the opposing side of politicians came up and said they still needed the document to be opened up. I mean, there's a time limit to everything. And because of the political statements, at one point it was said there'll be comments and consensus building that will be considered. But moving forward and going back to what Professor has said, I think the structure of how we proceed with this BBI process initiative is very important, so that we must acknowledge the fact that it is not about the politics of a referendum per se, but the fact that there are other legislative and political avenues, policy avenues that we can actually be able to participate and genuinely input on the issues that we think needs to be considered. As for the referendum, the issues that have been isolated, again, we need to be told whether all the issues will go for referendum or it is only the constitutional issues that will go. I think for that issue, it is clearly coming out that for referendum, the window for public participation is just as good as closed. So, but that doesn't mean we cannot agitate for more platforms to be able to input, because there's the legislative process, there's the policy space that can still cater for some of the issues that affect governance in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. So now we'll do the last round of questions, and this can be addressed by either Dr. Mutaha, Kamodo, or Valerie. So Mauli is asking, from teachers to village headmen, everyone is on path, if not yet, to registering construction companies, and the scramble for county loot through shoddy construction work is a devolution issue. How can we cure this mess once and for all? And more resources isn't one, as BBI proposal states. So I think they're asking the question on this issue of procurement and shoddy construction, and how BBI is going to address this. And then there's Jacob is asking, the other issue is disbursement of funds to counties towards the end of the financial year. How is BBI addressing this? Ruth Mudoni is asking, sorry, she's commenting, thank you, Wakili. I agree that we need to strengthen the accountability systems. And then Fred Wanyonyi is saying, as we celebrate more funds coming to counties, how is BBI addressing the issue of wage bill at counties, as most counties are turning to be employment bureau with wage bill at more than 52%. Paul, sorry. Job Manani is stating that, is it possible to have a constitutional discussion that is agreeable to all? Constitution making is a political process, and a political process, even when it is for the good, the political interests will always manifest themselves in the process. My take is that we need to, as civil society, look at the critical issues and ask ourselves, are they adding value, however little, to what we have? Equally, let us not look at BBI as a constitutional amendment drive. And then Robert is saying, sorry. Oh, there's someone, Job is asking Mr. Kamodo, is it possible to have a constitutional amendment process that is not divisive? So yeah, so those are some of the questions we'll answer in the next 25 minutes. But then I'd also like to inform you that the group session will be ending at 12, after which we'll go back to the main session, where we'll have a session to discuss strategy. So we have two questions to guide that discussion. The first question is, do you think CSOs should take a position on BBI or simply focus on civic education? And then should the meeting support or reject BBI? So participants, please include your responses in the comment section. And then now I hand over to the presenters to answer the questions. We can start with Kamodo, then Mutaha, and then Valerie. Thank you.
Yeah, so So thanks, Christine. And I'll start again at the end. You know, whether it's possible, it's this Job Monari. First Job, you make some very important statement earlier on, where you say that we need to be careful as a society to assume, you know, to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's my reading of that comment, and that we need to recognize that politicians, being who they are, they will push their interests, and that is the nature of politics. And what we need to be looking at is, if we were to put aside, you know, those areas where they have tried to pursue their elite interest, what is in this document that is beneficial, and is that which is beneficial so important that we're willing to leave some of the things that we may not be wanting, but they are not big enough, you know, or they are a worthy sacrifice for us to get that which is coming in through the BBI. I think that's a conversation that we need to have very pragmatically. Is it possible to have a constitution amendment that is not divisive? I would be surprised if you had a constitutional amendment which everyone agreed. What you, however, hope for a constitution is that the majority of the people agree with it, and it is not defined purely on the basis of political partisanship. Because unlike elections, which are going to be with us for 5 years, the constitution is going to be with us for a long time. And the one thing you want is that even where, you know, we may have disagreements in politics, at least we have one entity that is a uniting entity called the Constitution. One of the beauties about the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which had to do with its very strong pro-people development process, is that it is accepted across the country. You know, there are very few places you go and you find people consider this a Jubilee or an ODM or a, you know, whatever, a reggae document. They believe it is their constitution. My worry actually about BBI has been that if it brings in very divisive issues, you may end up having a referendum where half the country rejects the amendments, and so it legitimizes, you know, the constitution. Even if the constitution contains its legality, it is delegitimized. So in my mind, it's important that as much as possible, we carry the majority of the country together on a constitutional amendment, even if we can never have 100%, but the majority of the country, so that it is owned as a constitution that we are all accountable to. The question of exchequer was raised. I can't remember who's gentleman. Somebody raised a question about the question of exchequer releases. The truth about revenue in this country and the amount of money available to counties has actually not been so much about the 15% of the amount of money released, allocated to counties, but the amount of money actually released to the counties. And that's a big problem that, again, BBI does not address, which is unfortunate, because the question has been, okay, so we have allocated 35% in the constitution, but you know, the money is just not released, you know, or it is released, but it released on the 27th of June, which means it can't be spent. I know in the last 3 years, I think about 30% of the money is released in the month of June. That money is then pushed on to the next year and is not spent. So that's a big problem, and that requires a solution. Maybe in the PFM Act, that is something we may need to look into and see whether there should be penalties, or whether, you know, the money allocated to counties can be a fast charge, you know, so that the money is available immediately. Of course, the question to that is then, what does that do to a macroeconomic framework if we have money that the counties are not spending, and then we have to borrow to finance aspects of government? So it's a complex issue, but the way that the Treasury has handled it now has been wrong and anti the Constitution. Somebody asked a question about all construction companies are doing shoulder work in the counties. Construction companies are doing shoulder work at the national level, you know. So let's not assume that the problem of shoulder work is a problem of county government. It is a problem about the failure of the regulatory institutions to insist on standards. Even those roads that are built in the counties, they have engineers who are employed by the Ministry of Works and the County Works Department that insist on standards. So if that is not happening, that is not a problem of devolution, you know, and that happens even in the dams that we build at the national level. It happens to even the highways. It happens to a lot of the infrastructure we put up. So let us accept that we have a problem of enforcement of standards across the board. How do we improve it? Not just at the national level, but let us not forget that part of the reason why we devolved is to strengthen, you know, the local entrepreneurship. You know, you want the local people to be the ones building the local roads. You want to build local capacity. You want to build local entrepreneurs. And so let us not demonize local entrepreneurs. Let us continue to strengthen them. In fact, counties have a responsibility to strengthen local entrepreneurs, whether they're headmen or local teachers. And the question is, how do we enforce standards? How do we ensure, going back, in fact, to the issue of employment, one of the ways to ensure employment across the country is to actually make counties economic centers. The more we have a vibrant Trans Nzoia County, the more we have people employed, because employment is not just about government absorbing people. It's by creating an expanded economy which can absorb employment. And so the more resources we ensure are being used in productive enterprise at the counties, the more we have people being absorbed across the country, in Turkana, in Trans Nzoia, in Murang'a, in wherever it is. So the growth of counties is good in terms of eradicating unemployment, and is therefore a positive thing, and resolves fundamental issues of poverty, of inclusion, that I think a lot of times are ignored in the conversation about why devolution. Devolution is not just about government in the local areas. It's also about ensuring that devolution produces a healthy and vibrant economic environment. Thank you.
Now, just a few comments on the delayed disbursements. I think I mentioned a bit of that when I made my presentation this morning. But that even though Article 225, bearing in mind that equitable shares to county governments are entitlements, and therefore provided that transfer of funds should not be stopped without following certain procedure, somehow the Treasury has been delaying in transferring the resources to the county governments. And it is for this reason that I have kept arguing that we needed to understand and conceptualize Treasury as an independent organ that serves both levels of government in a manner that looks fair, than as a national government organ that is perceived as leaning towards one side and undermining the other level of government. That is something we still need to look at and see what happens. But even when all that is done, a month or two ago, I was in some meeting with some CEC for finance from one of the counties. I wouldn't say which one. The processes of getting money released by Treasury to county governments. And the unfortunate part of it is that as we talk outside here, the reality is that as we create all these structures, we simply increase the menu for corruption and for rent seeking. So that when county governments are seeking to have monies released from released by Treasury, you find they tell you we have a schedule we are following, but those counties that come with something to give to some people get money released earlier than others. So there is another problem of our ability to deal with the corruption at both levels in all activities that we do, and the kind of oversight institutions that we have, because it appears again our oversight has collapsed. Because in this meeting I was again told, even as you see both houses of parliament summon people there and all that, you will hear people who will tell you, you will arrive, attend a meeting for 30 minutes, and then the committee says we are adjourning for tea. And at that tea break, you are being told, my friend, forget about all these stories you are telling us. We have heard them from very many people. What have you brought for us if we are going to make a report for you? So another thing we need to address is the issue of failed oversight institutions. The Senate, the National Assembly, all these institutions have failed in their oversight function. And as we talk about BBI, we need to be asking ourselves, because not much is being said about some of those things. How are we going to remove corruption in the oversight institutions? Because if we have put them there for oversight and they themselves are rent seeking, then we are in big shit. We're in a big problem, and we need to really look at that. And so that is what I would like to say about delay. And then the last thing is that I still think that the civil society needs to find some way to make some input in the BBI, both the constitutional amendment and the others, so that we move forward. I pointed out at the beginning that what some of us have learned in this country is that when a process has started, it doesn't help to keep away. You need to maneuver and find a way to bring on board some of your concerns so that they are taken on board, because even when you try to boycott them or stay away, if the politicians have decided to push it, they will leave you behind and they'll go on and they'll get it done, and you'll be left crying when you have very good ideas that would have come on board and assisted the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Those are very good insights. Now, listening to the discussions as we've been able to articulate and the issues that have come out, it does not escape our minds that our issues are really not issues of law. Our issues are more about our attitude and our character as a people. And when we talk about the issues that afflict us, we turn around and blame our leaders, you know. If you look at the issues that were raised in the MOU that led us to have this BBI moment and BBI discussion, there are issues on ethnic antagonism, lack of national ethos, you know, issues of exclusivity and devolution being one of them, and many other issues, really. And much as we want to blame our leaders, then we are also reminded that our leaders are a reflection of who we are. And truly speaking and speaking to ourselves and just being honest with ourselves, we realize that as Kenya, we really have a value problem, character problem, and attitude problem. To the extent that even as we engage in these discussions, we easily get swayed with political statements and emotions, because we do not believe in taking responsibility as a people and caring about the other person. It's all about our turn to eat, and our turn to eat is facilitated by which leader we support and how they get into office. And really, I think we have gone on with this kind of ambitions for so long to our detriment as a nation. And that is what got us to where we are as BBI. And much as I think the BBI gives us a good opportunity to reflect, take a step back and reflect on what we really want as a nation, we then have allowed the moment to now become political. We are letting the politicians run away with the narrative. And that is why we are pleading with ourselves and whatever measures the CSO puts together to bring together Kenyans' views and Kenyans' real concern, and be able to stand for what is there for the common good, as opposed to what is there for me and my loved ones, maybe if we go to that extent. About the issue of constitutional amendment that is not divisive, constitutional amendment will definitely become a political process. And therefore, then again, in our context, you will end up with divisions that really would then turn the process into something that would be carrying forward that is negative. Therefore, for me, I think listening to the conversations that are going on in the country and the call for building of consensus around this particular process and moments that we have is very important. Building consensus doesn't mean doing away with the democratic process of allowing people to say yes or no, but just moving forward with a document that is, has majority of Kenyans on board, so that again, we do not have a document that is not fully owned and therefore has problems with implementation. So I think it is incumbent upon us as a nation to just find out what is in it for us and use this moment, which seems to be the only moment we have, to forge forward in terms of organizing ourselves around a common good than partisan politics. Thank you.
Can I make, Christine, let me just make another general point. I see we have about 7 minutes. I think one of the challenges about the discussion on the BBI is maybe there are two major problems. That the BBI discussion is happening in a time of intense political partisanship, you know, where with an election coming in 2 years, people have already defined which way they are going. And that is not always very healthy in a discussion on substantive constitutional issues, because whether we like it or not, they're going to be tainted by politics. And that is only natural. That happened in Brexit, you know, that has happened in other places where they've had a referenda around a time when there's significant political partisanship. But I think one of the things that CSOs could do is facilitate an honest conversation about the content of the BBI. And I recognize that these are difficult, but I think I'm not sure that one wants to get to the point where it's either for or against at this point. The most we can do is let people understand what the document is about. And to recognize that the BBI has 3 components, and we are only going to a referendum on one. BBI has significant policy propositions, and some of those actually government can start implementing today. You know, tax holidays, you know, ease of registration, you know, payment by government on time. Government actually by now we should have a very clear work plan and implementation matrix for the policy proposals, administrative procedures that don't require anything other than government to do what it's supposed to do. And I think that is something that by now civil society can isolate and actually start holding government to timelines on implementation. Number 2 is on the legislative proposals. That is actually what worries me more than even the constitution, because the constitution will be alert and will be seeing what's happening. But the legislative proposals, a lot of them actually claw back on constitutional provisions. I think there needs to be then a very clear strategy of how to deal with the proposed legislative changes to ensure we don't have clawbacks in the PFM, in the County Government Act. I think that's an area where civil society again should own and say we're going to be looking at Parliament as it seeks to amend the law. And then finally on the constitutional questions, which I think are important because we're going to vote for them as a people. But I think we must not forget the other 2, which probably go much further in terms of empowering the people than even the constitutional amendment. So I would say that those 2 areas, I think there needs to be a lot more time spent in terms of what is the strategy for civil society intervention on policy and administrative changes and on legislative changes, even as we talk about the proposed constitutional amendments, which may go for a referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutaha, Advocate Kamodo, and Valerie for the great insights you've provided. I believe the participants in this session are well informed and are able to even further interrogate the document from a point of knowledge. I'd like to thank the participants for their questions and being active in this session. So before I close, is there anyone who has a burning question, comment? We still have 5 minutes.
Well, okay, then let me answer the question that's been asked about the senators. I think the electing 2 senators, I'm not sure that I don't know that it weakens, I'm not sure how it weakens devolution by having 2 senators instead of 1. In fact, for me, from where I sit, it in terms of its input on devolution, I think it's effect neutral. I think my challenge about it is a broader question about the gender issue. We have tried to resolve the gender issue by enhancing the numbers in the Senate, but the Senate remains the weaker of the 2 houses. So you know, we are resolving the gender question, yes, but resolving it through a weaker house, you know. And for as long as the Senate retains where it is, with the functions that it has, in fact, the more I think about it, you know, if we don't strengthen the Senate, the justification for having it, you know, I mean, we have to debate whether we want a Senate, and if we're going to have a Senate, it must be strong. It cannot be the body which is subservient to the National Assembly on all issues. But I don't think in terms of the two senators that has a negative effect on devolution. Maybe on the question of numbers and the fact that, you know, the more we increase numbers, then it means that we have a detrimental effect on the amount available at the county level. But, you know, other than that gender issue about whether that's where we should be strengthening, or where the National Assembly, which is a stronger house, is where we should also ensure we have a significant gender component, a gender equity component. So that would be my view in answer to the question by I think it was Fred or George, I can't remember. Thank you. Bahati, sorry, Bahati. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, so that marks the end of this group session. So now the next session will be starting in the next 2 minutes. We'll be going back to the main session where we'll be strategizing. And I've posted the questions that will guide that session in the chat box. So I'll just repeat. The first question is, do you think CSOs should take a position on BBI or simply focus on civic education? Should the meeting support or reject BBI? So just type your comments in the chat section. But now you can take a health break for the 2 remaining minutes, and then we'll be sent back to the main session. Thank you all, and see you in the next session.
Okay, I'd like to welcome you all back from the group sessions. And now we'll go into our last plenary, which will be moderated by Joshua Changwony and Wanjiro Gikonyo. So I'd like to welcome them to proceed.
Okay, my name is Joshua Changwony. I'll be taking you through this session. Thank you very much for that successful breakaway groups and the respective discussions. We'll be compiling the outcome of those groups and then share with the participants. But now we are on our last session where we are looking on our civil society strategy and the approach to this discussion. This is just one thematic area on devolution. I think there are other 9 areas, 8 key ones, and there are issues around commissions and cross-cutting issues in the report. I think it is important to note that the role of civil society has been synonymous with the call for constitutional dispensation in Kenya. I mean, those ones that are charged with the mandate of promoting knowledge and information on democracy and government. You realize that in 2005, constitutional referendum, civil society played a very key role, as well as also the 2010 constitutional review process and the referendum then that culminated to the current constitution that we have. And our role largely was educating Kenyans on the review process, just to understand on the processes. And I believe the same applies now that people want to know the BBI process. And then the contents of the draft constitution, both in 2005 and 2010. BBI is here, and it has really awakened our role as civil society in terms of being visible and explaining to Kenyans, you know, objectively, without necessarily guiding them or indoctrinating them to say this is the way to go, or this is what to go against. The role of civil society in Kenya remains very critical, and I think this is a timely discussion through this, grouping of civil society that are looking at the devolution thematic area. So our strategy proposal is premised on the thinking, but of course this is not to say that it is the way to go, but it's just to help us have a stronger discussion, is to have an organized civil society voice where we increase capacities of citizens to have the messages in clarity on what is contained in the report, and the process that is going to culminate either for a parliamentary discussion, legislative review, or whether we are going into a referendum, or there are areas that probably citizens are finding them to be very contentious. And of course, ours is just to like simplify the information and ensure that citizens get this in a more clear way. I think the summary of it all, I mean, from this subject of devolution, I think we are all in agreement that the devolution has increased the citizen participation and promotion of civil society engagement with the people. And it has also responded to opportunities to influence decisions that affect the lives of our people, both at the county level and the national levels of our country. Our strategy now to be effective must touch on the two levels of government, on the proposals made by the Building Bridges Initiative report. And it is important that we look at the BBI, I mean, in three sections. We look at the BBI, the spirit, and this was the handshake, which I think, looking at the response by different people in our country, they really appreciated that, because it's really what calmed the tension that prevailed in our country post the 2017 general elections. Then BBI, the process in the sense that we had a task force which was put in place. And I think there's been a lot of questions surrounding that as to how it was put in place. Why are the youth not there? Why are the people living with disability not part of that task force? Why is it a group of older women and men? I mean, there are those questions around there. And then, of course, was their engagement with the citizens of this country participatory as provided for in the spirit of the Constitution 2010. Then lastly, there is the BBI, the content, now the report, which is here now with us. You remember now there's been a lot of anxiety in waiting for the report. And there were two releases. There was the first one last year, and there was also the extension of the tenure of the task force to relook on the implementation of the report. And now we have now the report and its proposals on how it can be implemented. So, and I think we have a lot of work to look into that. So culminating to the various caucuses by civil society organization, I know there's a group that is looking at elections, there's this group that is looking at devolution, there's also a team that is looking at the policy reforms, there's a team that is looking at the issues around anti-corruption, inclusion, national values, national ethos, rights and responsibilities, and all that. So we've organized a civil society conference to take place next week on the 26th and 27th here in Nairobi, which is going to bring civil society together to reflect on the Building Bridges Initiative, on the proposals on constitutional and legislative reforms. And this will culminate into a civil society strategy for democracy consolidation, safeguarding human rights, and safeguarding the gains in the Constitution of Kenya 2010. We will also dissect on the BBI, the spirit, which is the handshake, the BBI, the process, which is the task force, and BBI, the content, which is the report that is with us. So as civil society organizations, I think there is need for a serious lobbying and mobilization of popular participation in governance by the citizens of this country. Civil society to provide oversight, as well as also checks and balances. And our role, cannot be wished away, even in terms of championing those people who feel that they have been left out, because this is a national process. The Constitution is supreme. I mean, so Article 1, sovereignty, it belongs to the people. So safeguarding such kind of, powerful ruling by our Constitution. And I think we will be exploring on workable avenues to safeguard devolution and the other gains in the 2010 Constitution in respect to what the report is saying. And I think for purposes of devolution, I think the strategy and the approach will need to engagement with the county assemblies, either directly or through the county assemblies forum. Because this report, or rather after the signatures have been collected, the county assemblies will be playing a very, very critical role. Will they be county assemblies that will have been influenced in advance or will they be county assemblies that will live to the true spirit of representation of the people at the grassroots? So I think we have a role there as civil society organizations to put a check and balance. Then secondly, engagement with the county governors, either through the regional economic blocks, because they're actively engaged in that, or through the Council of Governors. And I think that those are frameworks that we need to build a relationship in terms of how we can present ideas, and of course, what we feel needs to be rectified. Then thirdly, engagement with Parliament, because Parliament is engaged with amendments, making or repeal of laws, and we have two houses in our Parliament, the National Assembly and the Senate. So I think we will be key to look into the two houses. And then fourthly, engagement with the Ministry of Devolution, because they are charged with the welfare of devolved units of government. And I think that is mapping the executive arm of government through the ministry. And then fifthly, citizens self-government as a protector of devolution, because if citizens will present themselves up as a people who are knowledgeable and understand the ongoings in our country, they will not be taken advantage of. But now that will need us now, civil society, to provide civic engagement and the education on constitutional reform processes and the Wanjiku's power. What power does the citizen have in all this? So I think that really lies squarely, on our side as civil society organizations. Then second, lastly, is the citizen petitions to county assemblies and parliament. I think we need to enable our citizens to regroup wherever there's something that probably is going to erode the gain in the 2010 constitution. Then lastly, I think civil society organizations, which this has been tested before, is diplomacy and negotiations, the power of persuasion through proactive round tables within, our reach of institutions of governance. It could be constitutional commissions. It could be, the parliamentary committees that we have in our country at the national level or at the county level. And then I think this is, a space for collecting views, collecting, information from our peer civil society leaders, so that at least we come up with a formidable roadmap on how we can also contribute towards enriching democracy and governance in our country. And I think, in the next 15 minutes, we'll be taking, any observation, any views from the participants on how further we can enrich our strategy and the approach as we move forward towards engaging, on the demand side and the supply side of governance in our country. Thank you. So maybe by show of hands, by indicating, raising up your arm through the chat section, we can give people to make also contributions towards on how we can enrich this.
Joshua, I'll request to intervene, and then we can do the show of hands for ideas on strategy. Just to reiterate what Joshua has said, which is that CRECO, which is, is convening this meeting next week that will look at the political engagement. This process that we have started will feed into that, but this process will continue the technical engagement, because here we've had a very technical conversation. We are going to collate these findings and develop a comprehensive memorandum and really represent what has been said here. Yes, there is some good, but make a set of demands. So we anticipate having that. We are going to aim to try and get something, not in the coming week. We'll give ourselves, the rapporteurs, time to compile, then time to synergize. So in the week after, we anticipate now releasing that comprehensive memorandum that speaks to the issues. But, like Joshua said, there is this other political process that will be spearheaded that can inform, and we hope these processes will go together, so that once we have our comprehensive memorandum, we also need to think through how do we get it to the political actors. So that is, you know, I just wanted to align expectation with regard to where we go from here. And I can see we're a bit ahead of time. And so I'll actually ask Joshua. Joshua, how would you like this to go? Would you like us to give the opportunity for 1, 2, 3 recommendations into the strategy? And once we hear those, we are then actually, we have our experts still with us. They may have some insights coming in from the groups, upon which then we can agree to close, having had a very good use of time this morning, with the expectation that we will possibly convene again, depending on what comes out. It might be for the press conference, it might be for further deliberation. So, really asking that we all remain open to engagement. So if there's any additional reflections in terms of strategy on top of what Joshua has said, or in support of what he said, that can inform this process, we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
So Wanjiru, maybe we could take a few of them, just in the spirit of promoting participation, and then we can do the wrap up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be prudent to do in appreciation also of the participation of participants. So I'm looking at the chat section. I mean, the participant section, there is no hand that is up, but feel free.
Joshua, there's a question here from Robert. Robert asks, will the final memorandum be to be presented acknowledge the CSOs That's a very, very good question. And anyone who registered will be acknowledged. If you didn't register, it's difficult to do so, but I think you're setting a bar for us that you're part of the process, you want to be counted. So we will take that on board. And I think also Abraham has dropped in his presentation into the chat, so you can access that. But otherwise, I think, Joshua, I'll step out and leave it to you for the next few minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, Wanjiru, for that. So we encourage participants so that we utilize time. If you have any addition on how best we could approach this, then feel free also to leave your email addresses so that we can even send you some of these compilations at some point so that we don't lose you. And we encourage everyone probably to get to CRECO, to TISA, and the organizers of these conversation around devolution, so that at least we keep in touch, because I can see we are from different parts of the country. I'm actually trying to see who has raised his or her hand up in terms of
here. I can't see where to raise my hand, but
okay, please, you can say your name and then you can proceed.
Okay, my name is Valerie Okumo Jiambo. I just want to add my voice on the issue of strategy from the insights that came from our group discussions. And what I had that was key to the strategy that can be used by the CSOs is for the CSO to be able to really look at the BBI report recommendation from the different proposals that have been given out, and therefore reconsider the issues of amendment to the Constitution, issues on consequential legislation, and issues on amendment of existing legislation, the policy measures and administrative measures therein. So that in the strategy that we come up with, because wholesomely, we need to make sure that there's something that at the end of the day needs to be achieved, so that even if we do not get to have a say per se in the amendment to the Constitution, then we should also not throw away the opportunities we would have with the legislative measures and the policy measures and administrative measures. And to that extent, it was proposed that CSOs could organize to hold government to the policy proposals out there, and to make sure that the legislative proposals do not claw back on the provisions of the Constitution, because this again is an opening where we could drop the ball for devolution or any other proposals that are there. So I think in our strategy, we must isolate those issues in their specific categories and consider how we are going to engage with the government on the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. That is great. That is good. But I'm not seeing any participant raising their hand. Or oh yeah, Paul Odongo. Can see Paul. Paul, you. Yeah.
This is Isaac Kenya from the Center for Multi-Party Democracy. I want to make my contribution and say that the BBI, the process of the BBI is more of a political process, and as one of the main strategy that we will consider the civil society is here to look in is bringing the political parties themselves, because we need the voice of the political parties. Because the BBI proposes, other than the electoral reforms, there are also a critical political party reforms. And without the political parties themselves deeply involved in this conversation, then we are likely to lose a very big a stakeholder who is very crucial. So one of the strategy I propose is that as we have the conversation that is stakeholders targeted, then we could consider engaging the senior leadership of different political parties, because at the end of the day, the discussion of BBI, passing the BBI, will go to the National Assembly, to the county assemblies, and it is the political parties that hold order that these political leaders account to. So that is one of the strategies that we from CMD Kenya, we consider we could work in hand with to ensure that we have the buy-in of the political parties, and then ensure that at least at the end of the day, the voice of the civil societies find their way in the hearts of the political actors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isaac. That is useful. I think we are not even included that, but we know CMD is coming for the conference next week. Odongo, I can see your hand is up. Please take over.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Odongo.
This is Wambani. I'm using Paul's phone. We are sharing the line. My concern is that given the way the handlers of BBI are adamant that even a full stop will not be changed, how are we sure that our recommendations will be taken on board? Then two, will it be wise for the civil society to push for this exercise to be done after elections when everybody is sober? Because for now, it's like everybody has taken stands. Thank you.
That's an observation. Chris Owala, and then Albert Malope after Chris.
Thanks a lot, my friend. Mine is one goes to Professor Dr. Mukangi. I heard him saying that we don't need to put county to account on how money before money goes to them, because the national government is also looting. I wanted to differ a bit and say that if that could be the beginning of reducing corruption for service delivery, then I don't have a problem with it. Two, looking at our role as civil society, I tend to think at times we take hardliner position for no reason. I tend to think at this juncture, is there what we can we engage this process and get something good out of it, rather than at times taking a position to oppose or to propose. I tend to think we need to be in a way sober, look at how do we influence it without taking a position that will be labeled pro or against, so that our views, our voices are not drawn. To me, that's my thinking, so that we don't confront, but we engage. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for that input. Maloba? Maloba, please, in the interest of time.
For BBI, And this is an observation to all youth in the Republic that please let us support BBI sincerely. Let us discussion or conversation from a sincere perspective, other than having minorities guiding the youth. Number two, a number of pressers which have. I would also like to encourage the youth that BBI is a 9-point document, and let us expound our discussion through all those points. There we get ourselves in a certain direction on issues of youth commission, help, maybe the two of them. There are wider spectrum that we can look at and continue discussing at a larger perspective of BBI, issues of corruption, security, wage bill, etc. And then I will advise that BBI is, to me, it looks like a conveyor belt, and we need to discuss even as it goes through the issues of tax breaks that are given to the youth, and avoid parading towards or being used as flower girls towards making some decisions. And this will need all youths to raise to the occasion and have a voice and stop making noise. Participate in the national baking of the national cake so that we are not left behind. And finally, it will just be important that we share on the same table to avoid breaking the table if we are not on the table that is making decisions for the youth. That will be my observation to all the youth, and request them that kindly, this document is going to affect us, it's going to affect the future generations, and so our voice must be well shared for prosperity. Thank you.
Okay, asante sana Malobe. We have three last ones, and let's have Pauline go. Pauline, please.
Oh, good. Thank you very much, Joshua. I just want to add into many places that I think it is important we don't lose that we cannot still win this battle without involving the politician. We are saying they are the ones kind of who are pushing the process. So here a strategy is required. How do we get involved? How do we involve them into this process? I don't think we can really make much progress when we just ignore, but how do we bring them closer? It is a corrective, a teamwork, so that even the CSOs can win this battle and our voices are heard. They are always ahead. So that is my view. Then how are you going to get to the ground, to the grassroots, for the Mwananchi Wajiko to get and understand this the 9 thematic areas which were raised by the handshake? How are we doing this? Because we cannot just talk in the Zoom, and we are not really getting into the grassroots to Wanjiko and understand how she is going to get into this, so that we get the numbers. As the politician, you know, they really deal with numbers. How many CSO, where have you gone? What have we done? I think that strategy is very important. As you're calling for the conference, who is coming for the conference? Are we in the 47 counties? What are other counties? Not only, you know, how many, the representation of those counties. That is my view, because we can never win so much. That is my view. We can't win really this battle of presenting our views, and we are taking it to the same politician. They are the one who choose the people who are already sitting into the committees of BBI. I think we really need to come up with a strategy of including or being included into the table of the decision making. That is my view.
Oh, thank you so much,
Joshua.
Thank you, Pauline. We have Mungo. Mungo, please. Dennis.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for this very informative session. I think I'll just have a quick question, and I put it out as a strategy going forward. I'm seeing here we have almost 150 participants from different CSOs across the country. And I think for us to be successful as CSOs is also that we need to synergize our efforts. for me, I'm from Youth Alive Kenya, and we want to focus our efforts on, especially when it comes to civic education, on what does the BBI say about the youth, so that they can also be understand and be part of this process. So I think for us, I think it is a monumental time for us as CSO to strategize on how can we come together, even if it is under different thematic areas, but how can we strengthen our collective voice, so that when we start civic education, or as we continue with civic education, we can be able to, I think we're stronger, united. And I think what you've done here, bring all of us together, is a good thing. So how can we carry on this, is my question.
Okay, thank you so much. Mungo. Ndupi, we have Ndupi, I saw your hand.
Thank you. I'm Bonventure Ndubi from RIP Butla. My view is that there is national representation of gender in Senate, but at the county level and even at the ward level, BBI is creating a ward fund. We want to push as a CSO to see that even in the ward fund, there is equal appointments. We want to see it even in the CDF, so that there is equal outlook of equality in the whole country, not just at the Senate only. Thank you.
Asante sana, and I think I will not be fair if I left out Otiende and Wepukulu. Sarah, please. I think that is our second last participant to make a contribution in the last session. Sarah, please. Sarah Otiende.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for bringing us together. My concern also, as a person who works in the grassroots level, I work for Namlolwe, a radio station, a station that broadcasts in Luo. I feel that the people at the grassroots level are not, they're not aware of what is going on, especially with the instinct that as long as our leaders have read the report for us, we are good to go. So they are not actually sure of what is in the report if you compare to us who are a bit enlightened and know what is there. So my issue is, how should we work so that their views are also channeled and they are put in consideration, so that we don't leave a gap between the people who know what is there in the BBI and the people who have no clue, but their votes count in. So that is my issue. We should see a way that we put together to avoid the gap that is there. Thank you so much.
Okay, asante sana. Wepukulu, please. I'm extending this by like 3 minutes, but Wepukulu, now the turn is yours.
Okay, thank you. Kenneth Wepuhulu of Kenya Online News. Okay, my issue and concern is, given the tough economic times that are facing the country due to the coronavirus, is it possible that we talk about this BBI and the referendum being postponed for some time, because the 14 billion I'm looking at it's a lot of money which can be used to maybe empower and do other programs. That's my concern. Thank you.
Kept it short, and I think you've done favors. Let's give the last one, which is Eunice Wanjala. Eunice, please, because I saw your hand and I don't want to leave you out. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my contribution is that we have to create a good rapport with the government, because I used to think that we are evil society. So we have to demystify the word evil society and be considered as partners in building Kenya. Thank you for listening.
Okay, asante sana, Eunice. So I think at this moment, we'll take this over to the conference, because I think there's a lot of conversation around the preparations and taking these views, consolidating views from different, sub-cluster themes of civil society organizations. And I think at this juncture, let me take to Wanjiru Kikonyo to wrap up this session. Over to you, Wanjiru.
Thank you so much, Joshua. the vote of thanks is not my job, but I'll appreciate you. And just as we close that session, I'd like to note that, yes, Georgia Wala had dropped something in the chat. I think this was also, he also got to present it. But there are many comments coming in. I've lost the ones. There was, I think, Mariam, who was recommending that civil society needs to do a press statement on the whatever comes out of this conversation. Yes, Mariam Abdallah talking about time is of the essence. We need to move fast. If we are to have a stand, it should be done as soon as possible. Can civil society do a national press conference after having a proper way of engagement on issues that are addressed? So I think that's a very actionable output of this conversation. We collate a reasoned and well-supported position and share that on a national platform. There was also another one, but now I'm having just a little bit of problem scrolling because there's a lot coming through, so you'll excuse me. I really like the last round, and it's interesting that Youth Alive were talking about civil society synergies, the need for civic education. In the public participation panel, civic education also came out as one of the key things that's needed, and the issue of civil society coming together. And also even interrogating the philosophical underpinnings of this document. So as civil society, we have a big role in terms of speaking into the document, that which is missing, as we were, you know, we've had in from the opening plenary and also had in the thematic groups. And I like that we are being given strategies of how we need to work thematically. And you know, when we talk about civic education, it starts with ourselves. And I think what is very clear is we've had a wonderful conversation today. However, we haven't, because we broke into thematic groups and the information is all over, we need to come back to deepen understanding. And one of the issues actually that came up is this issue of the Ward Development Fund. And there's a need to understand the politics behind the funds. And as civil society, for us to say, okay, if we're talking about devolution, what is the proper place of funds? Because the Ward Development Fund looks like a very good proposal, but really it's masking a lot of other issues. And there's a way we need to speak into the fund so that if there are funds, where are they created and for what purpose and how do they align to devolution? I also very much like one of the last comments on the COVID situation. You know, 1.8 million Kenyans have lost their livelihoods. Kenyans have taken 245 billion in online borrowing on the Safaricom app. And the borrowing last year was 68 billion. So Kenyans are borrowing because they're in financial distress. And you know, really, is this the time to have this conversation? So that is also something that we will speak to in our statement. I believe religious leaders spoke to that. And 14 billion. Yesterday, we got news that the government has asked for debt relief of 75 billion. Can you really ask for debt relief of 75 billion and then spend 14 billion on a referendum? We saw in America very fractious election, but what they did is they put the referendum questions in with the election. So as long as you're doing, you know, that universal suffrage process, you're having an electoral process, you have the elections, but also tie it up with one or two key questions around the referendum. So we need to get creative. And then my last reflection before I hand, you know, I move to closing is, Eunice, the Oxfam have produced a very, very useful report. And it's the comment you made about the evil society, that we are being viewed as the evil society. And what this report looks at is the trend across the world for the demonization of civil society. So what has happened in Kenya is not unique to Kenya. And this report goes on to say that there are interests around why you must demonize civil society, because civil society is pushing for human rights-based approach, inclusion, accountability, and there are global as well as local interests, and there are economic interests that do not want these issues, do not favor a human rights-based paradigm. So we need to understand what are the forces we are fighting. There are some that we can see, there are others we cannot see. And the demonization of civil society is that the solution is not to get into bed with government or convince government we are so good. It's really to say, these are the principles that provide sustainable development and a sustainable way of Kenya coming together to build its nationhood. These are the principles, and we are ready to engage with anybody who embraces the principles. So let us educate ourselves. Let us not be cowed. Let us not be absent, because we must confess we have been absent. Let us re-engage politically, but for us, we say, even as we engage with the politicians, we do it with evidence. We do it to promote the philosophy of human rights-based inclusion and the principles of the Constitution. So thank you so much for that. And just before I ask Job Manani of Uraia to close us, I wish to acknowledge the support given by Uraia, Transparency International, and TISA in terms of financial support to cover some of the expenses around this forum. I should have done this at the opening, just to appreciate that that support has been very instrumental in us being here today. And I'll reiterate once again, once we collate the findings, we will share them back with you. We will also share back the various reports that come out of here once we are, and we'll make a decision on how some of them are ready to be shared, some need to be collated. But then also we will aim towards a press statement, and we will then aim towards a more structured engagement. So what I can say conclusively is this is our first conversation. It is us coming together to hear each other, to understand, are we seeing the same thing? And from this conversation, we can see things are not well, but we also see there's an opportunity, and we are ready to come together to change how we've been working and step up our engagement so that we can take back this space and take back and ensure we protect the Constitution. So I'd like to end there and invite Job Manani of Uraia to please take us through the vote of thanks. Job? Thank you.
Thank you for this. I think mine is to appreciate all of us who made time for this, and the discussants who have been able to take us through all these rich discussions. And one thing that I'm picking from the conversations that we were having, be it from the groups that we were and the plenary, is that there is still a critical role, or there is a critical contribution that civil society organizations need to make to the discussion that is ongoing. And it is a good start for all of us. And as Wanjiru and Joshua have put it, this is the beginning, and we look forward to a more enriching conversation that will culminate into, a memorandum, or be it a position that we're going to take, be it, deciding that we can only restrain ourselves to civic education, or are we taking a stand? So I think it's something that we can reflect upon. And as we have started this conversation, we hope that by next week, when we are having this physical meeting, I think Joshua has already invited all of us. I hope Joshua, I'm not trying to invite people to get crashed into your meeting, but I am sure you invited all of us. I think we will develop upon what we've been able to do right now, and then we can be able to engage. From Uraia, we want to thank you, sincerely thank all of us for making time for this and being candid enough, from the questions, from the contributions that we've been making. And this is the spirit of engagement that we want to be having. And it will also help us, make informed choices, or even inform our mind and these debates upon when we having discussions around this with the public. So we need to, I can only say that we need to take our space as civil society organizations, and let us not leave these, especially the civic education and educating the people, the public, let us not leave that role to the political class alone. The political class will do what they do best, and the civil society organizations, we need to do our bit. And one thing that I agreed with Kamodo Wiganjo in our group is that we need to look and ask ourselves, what are some of the gains, or what is the value addition that we're getting from all the BBI discussion, and is it something good enough for us, to say we can leave this? So can we engage on the content? So without saying much, I will say that we also need to be aware that the political class are doing their bit. The civil society actors, we need to do our bit. We at Uraia, we always encourage engagement, and this is the beginning for this, and we need to build on this. With all those remarks, I want to sincerely thank all of you for making time for this, and let's hope that we will engage more on this. Thank you, Wanjiru.
Thank you so much. And actually, that is the end of our meeting. And all I can say is thank you once again. Have a wonderful afternoon, good weekend, until we meet again. Thank you. I forgot to mention thank you to our sign language interpreters. Thank you for your great efforts, Asante.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.